Hello, my dear members and people of the podcast. As we continue now with Joan of Arc, Domremy pillaged and burned is what we are on. They were peaceful and pleasant, those young and smoothly flowing days of ours. That was the case as a rule, we being remote from the seat of war. But at intervals, roving bands approached, near enough for us to see the flush in the sky at night, which marked where they were burning some farmstead or village, and we all knew, or at least felt, some day they would come yet nearer, and we should have our turn. This dull dread lay upon our spirits like a physical weight. It was greatly augmented a couple of years after the Treaty of Troyes. It was truly a dismal year for France. One day we had been over to have one of our occasional pitched battles with those hated Burgundian boys of the village of Maxey, had been whipped, and were arriving on our side of the river after dark, bruised and weary, when we heard the bell ringing. It was ringing the Toscane, or, as in French, Tossi. We ran all the way, and when we got to the square we found it crowded with the excited villagers, and weirdly lighted by smoking and flaring torches. On the steps of the church stood a stranger, a Burgundian priest, who was telling the people news which made them weep and rave and rage and curse by turns. He said our old mad king was dead, and that now we in France and the crown were the property of an English baby lying in his cradle in London, and he urged us to give that child our allegiance and be its faithful servants and well-wishers, and said we should now have a strong and stable government at last, and that in a little time the English armies would start on their last march, and it would be a brief one, for all that it would need to do would be to conquer what odds and ends of our country yet remained under that rare and almost forgotten rag, the banner of France. The people stormed and raged at him, and you could see dozens of them stretch their fists above the sea of torch-lighted faces and shake them at him, and it was all a wild picture, and stirring to look at. And the priest was a first-rate part of it too, for he stood there in the strong glare and looked down on those angry people in the blandest and most indifferent way, so that while you wanted to burn him at the stake, you still admired the aggravating coolness of him, and his winding up the coolest thing of all, for he told them how, at the funeral of our old king, the French king at arms had broken his staff of office over the coffin of Charles, of course this will have been Charles IV, and his dynasty, at the same time saying in a loud voice, God grant long life to Henry, King of France and England, our sovereign lord. And then he asked them to join him in a hearty amen to that. The people were white with wrath, and it tied their tongues for a moment. They could not speak, but Joan was standing close by. She looked up in his face and said in a sober, earnest way, I would I might see thy head struck from thy body. Then, after a pause, and crossing herself, if it were the will of God. This is worth remembering, and I will tell you why. It is the only harsh speech Joan ever uttered in her life. When I shall have revealed to you the storm she went through, and the wrongs and the persecutions, then you will see that it was wonderful that she said but one bitter thing while she lived. From the day that dreary news came, we had one scare after another, the marauders coming almost to our doors every now and then, so that we lived in ever-increasing apprehension, and yet were somehow mercifully spared from actual attack. But at last our turn really did come. This was in the spring of '28. The Burgundians swarmed in with a great noise in the middle of the dark night. We had to jump up and fly for our lives. We took the road to Neuchâtel and rushed along in the wildest disorder, everybody trying to get ahead, and thus the movements of all were impeded. But Joan had a cool head, the only cool head there. She took command and brought order out of that chaos. She did her work quickly and with decision and dispatch, and soon turned the panic flight into a quite steady-going march. You will grant that, for a young person, and a girl at that, this was a good piece of work. She was 16, shapely and graceful, and of beauty so extraordinary that I might allow myself any extravagance of language in describing it, and yet have no fear of going beyond the truth. There was in her face a sweetness and serenity, purity, that justly reflected her spiritual nature. She was deeply religious, and this is the thing which sometimes gives a melancholy cast to a person's countenance. But it was not so in her case. Her religion made her inwardly content and joyous, and if she was troubled at times, and showed the pain of it in her face and bearing, it came of distress for her country. No part of it was chargeable to her religion. A considerable part of our village was destroyed, and when it became safe for us to venture back, there we realized what other people had been suffering in all the various quarters of France for many years, yes, decades of years. For the first time we saw wrecked and smoke-blackened homes, and in the lanes and alleys carcasses of dumb creatures that had been slaughtered in pure wantonness, among them calves and lambs that had been pets of children, and it was pity to see the children lament over them. And then the taxes. Everybody thought of that. That burden would fall heavy now, in the commune's crippled condition, and all faces grew long with the thought of it. Joan said, "Paying taxes with naught to pay them with is what the rest of France has been doing these many years. But we never knew the bitterness of that before. We shall know it now." And so she went on talking about it, and growing more and more troubled about it, until one could see that it was filling all of her mind. And at last we came upon a dreadful object. It was the madman, hacked and stabbed to death in his iron cage in the corner of the square. It was a bloody and dreadful sight. Hardly any of us young people had ever seen a man before who had lost his life by violence. So this cadaver had an awful fascination for us. We could not take our eyes from it. I mean, it had that sort of fascination for all of us, but one. That one was Joan. She turned away in horror, and could not be persuaded to go near it again. There, it is a striking reminder that we are but creatures of use and custom. Yes, and it is a reminder, too, of how harshly and unfairly fate deals with us sometimes. For it was so ordered that the very ones among us who were more fascinated with mutilated and bloody death were to live their lives in peace, while that other, who had a native and deep horror of it, must presently go forth and have it as a familiar spectacle every day on the field of battle. You may well believe that with plenty of matter for talk now, since the raiding of our village seemed by long odds the greatest event that really ever occurred in our world. For although these dull peasants may have thought they recognised the bigness of some of the previous occurrences that had filtered from the world's history dimly into their minds, the truth is they hadn't. One biting little fact, visible to their eyes of flesh, and felt in their own personal vitals, became at once more prodigious to them than the grandest remote episode in the world's history, which they had got at second hand and by hearsay. It amuses me now when I recall our elders talked then. They fumed and fretted in a fine fashion. "Ah, yes," said old Jacques d'Arc, "things are come to a pretty pass indeed. The king must be informed of this. It is time that he cease from idleness and dreaming, and get at his proper business. He meant our young disinherited king, the hunted refugee. That was, indeed, Charles III, of course. Was it Charles? No. Charles VII, I think it was. There's that many Charles. I always get them mixed up, and it doesn't state in Latin what it is. And it definitely doesn't state it in French. It just says Charles. But it does mean one of the Charleses. Maybe Charles VII, I think. You say well, said the mayor. He should be informed, and that at once. It is an outrage that such things would be permitted. Why, we are not safe in our beds, and he taking his ease yonder. It shall be made known, indeed it shall. All France shall hear of it. To hear them talk, one would have imagined that all the previous 10,000 sackings and burnings in France had been but fables, and this one was only fact, nothing else. It is always the way. Words will answer as long as it is only a person's neighbour who is in trouble. But when that person gets into trouble himself, it's time that the king rise up and do something. The big event filled us young people with talk too. We let it flow in our steady stream while we tended the flocks. Well, we tended the ones that were alive anyway. We were beginning to feel pretty important now, for I was 18, and the other youths were from 1 to 4 years older. Young men, in fact. One day the paladin was arrogantly criticising the patriot generals of France and said, Look at the noise, the bastard of Orleans. Call him a general. Just put me in his place once. Never mind what I would do. It is not for me to say. I have no stomach for talk. My way is to act and let others do the talking. But just put me in his place once, that's all, and look at St. Thérèse, pooh, and that blustering La Hire. Now, what a general that is! It shocked everybody to hear these great names so flippantly handled, for to us these renowned soldiers were almost gods. In their far-off splendour they rose upon our imaginations dim and huge, shadowy and awful, and it was a fearful thing to hear them spoken of as if they were mere men, and their acts open to comment and criticism. The colour rose in Joan's face, and she said, I know not how any can be so hardy as to use such words regarding these sublime men, who are the very pillars of the French state, supporting it with their strength, and preserving it at daily cost of their blood. As for me, I could count myself honoured past all deserving, if I might be allowed but the privilege of looking upon them once, at a distance, I mean, for it would not become one of my degree to be approaching them too near. The paladin was disconcerted for a moment, seeing by the faces around him that Joan had put into words what the others felt. Then they pulled his complacency together and fell to fault, finding once again. Joan's brother, Joan, said, If you don't like what our generals do, why don't you go to the great wars yourself and better their work? You're always talking about going to the wars, but you don't. You never do. It's all talk, blah, 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 ramble, ramble. Look you, said the paladin, it's easy to say that. Now I will tell you why I remain chafing here in bloodless tranquillity, which my reputation teaches you is repulsive to my nature. I do not go because I am not a gentleman. That is the whole reason. What can one private soldier do in contests like this? Nothing. He is not permitted to rise from the ranks. If I were a gentleman, would I remain here? Not one moment. I can save France. You may laugh, but I know what is in me. I know what is hid under the peasant cap. I can save France, and I stand ready to do it, but not under these present conditions. If they want me, let them send for me. Otherwise, let them take the consequences. I shall not budge, but as an officer. Alas, poor France! France is lost, said Pierre d'Arc. Since you sniff so at others, why don't you go to the wars yourself, Pierre d'Arc? Oh, I haven't been sent for either. I am no more a gentleman than you. Yet I will go. I promise to go. I promised to go as a private under your orders when you were sent for. They all laughed. And the dragonfly said, "So soon? Then you need to begin to get ready. You might be called for in 5 years. Who knows? Yeah, in my opinion, he'll march for wars in 5 years." "He will go sooner," said Joan. She said it in a musing voice, but several heard it. "How do you know that, Joan?" said the dragonfly, with a surprised look. But Jeanne d'Arc broke in and said, "I want to go myself. But as I'm rather young yet, I also will wait and march when the paladin is sent for." "No," said Joan. "He will go with Pierre." She said it as one who talks to himself aloud without knowing it. And none heard it but me. I glanced at her and saw that her knitting needles were idle in her hands, and that her face had a dreaming, absent look in it. There were fleeting movements of her lips, as if she might be occasionally saying parts of a sentence to herself. But there was no sound, for I was the nearest person to her, and I heard nothing. But I set my ears open, for those two speeches had affected me uncannily. I, being superstitious and easily troubled by any little thing of a strange and unusual sort. Noël Raguesson said, "There is one way to let France have a chance for her salvation. We've got one gentleman in the commune. At any rate, we can't. And why can't the scholar change name and condition with the paladin? Then he can be an officer. France will send for him then, and he will sweep these English and Burgundian armies into the sea, he will. Just like I say so, you know. Aye, just like that. Just like flies. I was a scholar. That was my nickname, because I could read and write." There was a chorus of approval, and the sunflower said, "That is the very thing. It settles every difficulty. The Sieur du Comte will easily agree to that. Yes, he will march at the back of the Captain Paladin and die early, covered with common soldier glory. He will march with Jean and Pierre, and live with these wars when they are forgotten," Joan muttered. "And at the 11th hour, Noel and the paladin will join these, but not of their own desire." The voice was so low that I was not perfectly sure that these were the words, but they seemed to be. It makes one feel creepy to hear such things. "Come now," Noel continued. "It's all arranged. There's nothing to do but organise under the paladin's banner and go forth and rescue France. You'll all join." All said yes, except Jacques d'Arc, who said, "I'll ask you to excuse me. It is pleasant to talk war, and I am with you there, and I've always thought I should go soldiering about this time. But the look of our wrecked village and the carved-up and bloody madman have taught me that I am not made for such work and such sights. I could never be at home in that trade. Face swords and the big guns and death, it isn't in me. No, no, count me out. And besides, I'm the eldest son, and the deputy prop and protector of the family. Since you are going to carry Jean and Pierre to the wars, somebody must be left behind to take care of our Joan and her sister. I shall stay at home, and grow old in peace and tranquillity." "He will stay at home, but not grow old," murmured Joan. The talk rattled on in the gay and the careless fashion, a privilege to youth. And we got the paladin to map out his campaigns and fight his battles and win his victories and extinguish the English and put our king upon his throne and set his crown upon his head. All in talk, of course. Then we asked him what he was going to answer when the king should require him to name his reward. The paladin had it all arranged in his head, and brought it out promptly. "He shall give me a dukedom, name me Premier Pierre, make me hereditary Lord High Constable of France, and marry you to Princess. You're not going to leave that out, are you?" The paladin coloured a trifle and said brusquely, "He may keep his princesses. I can marry more to my taste." Meaning Joan, though nobody suspected it at the time. If any had, the paladin would have been finely ridiculed for his vanity. There were no fit mate in that village for Joan of Arc. Everyone would have said that. In turn, each person present was required to say what reward he would demand of the king if he could change the places with the paladin and do the wonders the paladin were going to do. The answers were given in fun, Each of us tried to outdo his predecessors in extravagance of the reward, he would claim. But when it came to Joan's turn, and they rallied her out of her dreams and asked her to testify, they had to explain to her what the question was, for her thought had been absent, and she had heard none of this latter part of the talk. She supposed they wanted a serious answer, and she gave it. She sat considering some moments and said, If the Dauphin, out of his grace and nobleness, should say to me, now that I am rich, and am come to my own again, choose and have, I should kneel and ask him to give me command that our village should never more be taxed. It was so simple and out of a heart that it touched us. Nobody laughed. We fell to thinking. We did not laugh. But there came a day when we remembered that speech with a mournful pride, and were glad that we had not laughed, perceiving then how honest her words had been, and seeing how faithfully she made them good when the time came, asking just that boon of the king, and refusing to take even any least thing for her own self. And that's the next part of Joan of Arc. And bear in mind, she is only 16 at that time, but yet what you are seeing come through Joan is it's Catholicism. It's exactly how I was brought up, the same way. You do not dwell and think of what you can give yourself. You only think of what you can do and give to others who are in need. Something that would benefit them greatly in that time of need. So I understand her. And I don't agree with the British. I don't agree with what they did. Yes, I am British. It's different now. It's not like that. But back then, I wouldn't have agreed with it. No. I'd have probably been where Joan was, and I'd have probably been saying some of the things that Joan said. Because I do agree with her. Anyway, when we go to the next part, this is when you will understand Joan and the Archangel Michael. Like I say, all the saints and archangels very much steeped in Catholicism. Thank you for listening, and many blessings. Do, do, do.